Hey, this is Mark, and welcome back to Beyond Profit, a Global Perspective. This time we're going to do a very sort of specialized thing, and that is the question, how can you figure out what country might be best for your business as part of your entry strategy? There's a very specific way that I go about trying to make that analysis, a specific tool that I use, and I want to share that with you. So, let's go. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you to please like this video, subscribe to this channel, leave some comments. I mean, if there's some things that you have questions about, or particularly if there's topics that you want to learn about and you'd like me to share that with you, then leave those in the comments below. Like I said, share this with other people. If this is something that you think would be helpful, maybe for other people in your class or other people who you know are working on business plans or just want to learn about some of this stuff, go ahead and share. I mean, I'm happy to help any way I can. So, why am I doing this video? This video is really designed for some specific audiences, right? First of all, I have students, some of whom are writing a global business plan. And this is a tool that we use so that these students can run the analysis in order to determine what kind of company might fit in a certain kind of global environment, a specific country, right? So that's the first audience. I also want to give a huge shout out to my fellow professor, Janet Graham. She actually introduced me to this tool. She learned about it through some people who do international business consulting. I've done some in the past as well, but I really like this tool. I think this is something that not just students can use, but is also used by many in the professional community. And if you're interested in taking a business someplace overseas, this is probably a good thing that you can use to do your research. I always tell my students, like, if you want to go do this at some point, you have to be able to satisfy a boss, an employer, a financier. Somebody's going to be looking at your research, and your research can't just be this sort of loosey-goosey subjective kind of thing, like, hey, I just looked at the internet and I compared this stuff, and right? It has to be data-based, it has to be systematic, right? You're trying to make a case that something that is in your head is actually going to work when you move it someplace in the world. So I think this is a really good tool that helps to achieve that. Janet and I refer to this tool as a decision matrix, and it has three major components. One is a PESTLE analysis, the second one is a cultural analysis, and the third part is a currency or exchange rate analysis. And I'd like to talk about each one in turn. Okay, so we're looking at the weighted decision matrix, and this is what we use to compare risk across countries. First, let me say that I'm happy to share it with you, right? So this isn't something you have to necessarily recreate. If you find me on one of the various social media sites that I'm on, or leave a comment, try to contact me one way or another, I am happy to send you a copy of this. Like I said, this is something that I think is not only useful for students who are planning global business plans and stuff like that, but also for professionals who want to try to take a business overseas. What you're going to be doing is looking at certain decision factors and using those to evaluate the relative risk of the countries that you're thinking about going into. So the top section here is what's considered to be a PESTLE analysis, right? That's an acronym. It's PESTLE, right? Political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. And if you look here, there is a video link that will show you a video that explains all of those parts and what it is you're looking for, and to some extent how to analyze that. So I think that video would be very helpful for you, and that's something that you can get to right here. The next section of this matrix is to look at cultural values. Likewise, here's also a video that goes into Hofstede's analytics, talking about how it is that you can look at various aspects of culture and make that cross-cultural comparison, and then you will feed those numbers here into the cultural section. Finally, we have exchange rates, right? I have some videos on currency. You can see them here. You can link to those through my channel, and those will help you not only understand what causes currency rates to fluctuate, but also understand a little bit more about the things that you need to be looking at as you are considering, how to compare countries in terms of relative exchange rates, say between the United States, if that's where you're from, and whatever country it is that you're going into. Now that we've gone over the major parts of the matrix, let's talk about how to use it. What I'm first going to do is enter in some countries that I may be hypothetically interested in. Now, before we get into the countries, let's talk a little bit about regions. I always recommend for anybody who's thinking about doing an entry into a country is that don't think about countries first. Start off thinking about regions, because you may have countries that are similarly situated in the world who have similar characteristics, and maybe one country might edge out the other in ways that you may not necessarily expect. So I think starting at a regional level is a much better way to go, right? Start thinking about Eastern Europe or Pacific Rim countries. Think about Africa or Southeast Asia. There are lots of regions in the world to pick from, but when we're doing this comparison, I think it's most meaningful if you pick 3 of them from the same region. So for my example, I'm going to do exactly that. So let's pretend that I'm interested in bringing my business, whatever it is, into a South American country. So we're going to choose South America as our region. So I'm going to randomly pick 3 South American countries here. Let's just say Brazil, Peru, Ecuador. And so I'm entering those in. And then I'm going to do some research on each one of these indicators to make that comparison. Like I said, the videos that I have shared before on the PESTLE, on cultural analysis, and on the currency analysis will help you understand what kind of research you need to do and what kind of concepts we're going for, right? But what's nice about this document is that it actually gives you some specific indicators that will give you that data, and it'll be good data. So if we look over here, right, you see the criteria is political. Here's a brief definition of what that's about. And then over here you see some key indicators. The question at this point is, how do you get the data? And I'm going to show you just exactly how easy it is to do that. So let's look at the weighted decision matrix, and check this out. There are directions up here at the top. How to use the weighted decision matrix. Pretty straightforward, right? So it says start with a globalEdge website and select get insights by country. So all I have to do is copy and paste that link from the spreadsheet, stick it into a search engine, and that's going to give me the globalEdge website. Now, this is a great website with loads and loads of accumulated data from multiple sites across the internet. It's a really great research source, and I'll show you exactly how and why as we go through. So direction number 1, right, start with globalEdge. 2, from the world map, it's right here in front of us. Click on one of your 3 countries of choice within your region of study. So let's start off with Brazil. That's the first one that we chose. I'm going to click on that, and that's going to send me to a page that's got loads of information about Brazil. Like, I could click on all this stuff and get lost in it. Not to mention all the stuff that's over here, like trade statistics, economy, government, culture, risk. I mean, a lot of this stuff, if you're looking for qualitative information to support your analysis in a business proposal, if you're my student in this paper, then this is a great place to get all of this stuff. But what I'm interested in is indices, right? That's what it says next, number 3, in the left-hand column, click on indices. So that's what I'm going to do. And then, hey, guess what? All of those indicators, those key indicators that are in the right-hand side of the screen over here, they appear here in globalEdge. You don't have to go to the individual websites to hit every single database. This is one-stop shopping and it's all free. So what am I going to do? Let's see. I'm going to look at all these things and then I got to figure out, okay, so how am I going to take notes? How am I going to remember this? Well, in my weighted decision matrix, I also have a sample table. You don't have to follow this format necessarily, but I think it's a pretty good one. And I have only included the political key indicators, right? You can go through and you can do all the rest of them, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to show what I would do if I were going through the political analysis. So again, we're starting with Brazil, and these are the 4 indicators that are in that right column. So let's start off with corruption perceptions index. Okay, it is right here, scores 38, so I'm going to enter in 38. Then next, I'm looking for freedom of the press. So I'm going to control F my way through this and look for freedom of the press. That's 47. So I'm going to put that number down there. And then management index, we're going to say 5.58. And then status index, that's 7.15. Okay, it took me maybe a minute. I'm going to spend another minute on Peru. So I'm going to go back to my map by country. There it is, and we're going to click on Peru, and we're going to go to indices, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. So corruption perceptions, we've got 36, and our freedom of the press, it's 45. Management index, we got a 5.82, and then we go to status, which is a 6.83, and just for fun, this is what you will do. I'm doing it for fun, just for your benefit, I guess, right? So let's go back and look at Ecuador. So once again, going back to my world map, I am going to find Ecuador. Click on that, click on my indices, got all the same data again. So corruption perception, we've got 36. Freedom of the press, which is 66. That is pretty different from the other two. Management index, we'll say 5.22. And status, 6.48. Okay, easy. I have got data that's going to help me figure out how to evaluate this country politically. How do I analyze this? What do I do with these numbers? Well, first of all, I'm going to look at which ones are significantly different from each other. So numbers like 38 or 36 or 47 or 45, right? You know, they're not substantially different enough where I would definitely say, oh yeah, so Brazil at 47 is definitely better than Peru at 45. But the difference between those two and 66, that's pretty substantial. So there's a real difference in terms of freedom of the press between these different countries, with Ecuador really having greater freedom of the press. The other one that really stands out to me is status index. And that's with Brazil with 7.15, but then it's quite a bit different from Ecuador. And I think they're substantially enough different that you could probably make a note about that. So if I'm looking at these based on the differences, I might say that Brazil has an advantage in status index and Ecuador has an advantage of freedom of the press. Keep in mind, these are all political indicators. Then I might go back and see, like, what do these things mean and what might that mean for my business? So here I am already at the status index. It says it evaluates the political and economic transformation dimensions of a country based on how well the ground rules for democracy are anchored in society. Okay, so why is that important? Well, if you've got the rules of democracy, not just sort of let's pretend there's a democracy, but really like people practice that way, that probably speaks pretty well for the rule of law, which means you may have a pretty predictable business environment. You might have people following contracts and not violating those. It's those kinds of things that might mean that you've got a pretty favorable environment sort of from the ground up. And to that extent, it looks like Brazil is probably the best among them. And then you've got freedom of the press, which in Ecuador's case, let's look at freedom of the press. It assesses the degree of print, broadcast, and internet freedom of every country in the world. And that might be important to you in terms of making sure that whatever information that you're putting out as a business is going to be able to get to the consumers, and that you're able to express yourself as freely as possible without harassment or oppression. And if you're in certain sorts of industries, then that might be a big deal. Particularly would be a big deal, like if you're starting up a media company or something, right? I mean, if you're controlling information, how that is handled, might be a pretty significant factor for you. Let's go ahead and look at the other two also, just so we understand. So corruption, no surprise, is ranking countries in terms of the perceived corruption and the misuse of public power for private benefit. By the way, if I want to know more about it, I can click on the websites of any of these where this data comes from. So if I click here on Transparency International, so here I am on the Corruption Perception Index, and it's got a map of the world here as well, and it's got a list of from the least corrupt to the most corrupt. As you can tell, the higher the score, the less corrupt you are. So the cleanest country in the world is Denmark. If I'm looking at Brazil, for example, it looks like that's ranked about number 107th in the world in terms of corruption. You can compare that, right? Like you've got Brazil, I can compare it to Peru, which is 127th, so not as good. Ecuador is 121st. So you can get more information by actually going back to the sites and checking some of this out. There's lots of good information here. The next thing I want to do is go back to the matrix and then determine how we're going to figure out what to do with these numbers. So we have three columns, Brazil, Peru, and Ecuador. And I want to be able to rank them politically. Well, if you look at the number 5 direction here, where it says assign a score for each decision factor or criteria, a score of 5 is good to low risk, and a score of 1 is bad to high risk. So if I look back at my numbers, some of these things seem about the same. So like maybe that's a wash. We already talked about the differentiation. But the key question is that overall, in terms of politics, which one is the best? I'm going to say Brazil. And that's certainly true also in terms of the corruption rankings that we just read here too. So I'm going to say Brazil. Brazil is not, I would say, a good or low risk when it comes to politics. It's sort of like middle to bottom in general. So maybe we give it a 3. We give Ecuador a 2. Peru maybe a 1, just to create that sense of differentiation between the three of them. So I will do that on each one of these indicators, getting data for economic, social, technological, and you name it. And then I'm going to enter numbers in here. So for now, I'm just going to enter some random numbers so you can see what happens. And this is going to automatically populate at the bottom based on my random numbers, so Ecuador wins, okay? But of course, I haven't filled them all out. You would fill them all out. And all of this information that you get from globalEdge will help you fill out everything in the PESTLE analysis, right? From political, economic, social, technological, and environmental. It also will help you with exchange rates. So if you look over here, and it says financial secrecy index, open budget, paying taxes indicator, right? This stuff is all in globalEdge 2. So again, I'll use my handy Control F. I'm going to put in paying taxes indicator. There's your numbers. So even on the exchange rates down at the bottom, you can get that for that indicator too. Now, I will say that when you're doing analysis on the exchange rates in terms of what is important, I suggest that you review those videos that I provided on exchange rates. Please go back and review that. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Cultural values is different too, in that you're not going to find the information for cultural values really in globalEdge, but you will by going to Hofstede Insights. So there's a video on that. Go check that out. It will show you how to find all of that data. And then you would use the same method, collect that data and the numbers, and then enter information into cultural values. Now, when we're looking at the PESTLE, like I said, it's basically those first 6. You'll notice also that the weights are different for different indicators. And the reason is that as this spreadsheet was designed, political, economic, and social were perceived as more or less twice as important as the other factors that follow. that may be a little bit arbitrary. I think there's a good reason for those three being more important. But I will also say that this is a tool, right? It's not something that you have to just like obey blindly. For example, if you're in a kind of a business where technology is a big deal, change the weight to 2, right? If you're in a situation where you think that, the politics aren't going to matter as much compared to sort of like the economic decision, you can change it down to a 1. You can play with this, right? This thing, it's to help you try to be objective about the decisions that you're going to make. Because when you're making major investments, you're wanting a business to move somewhere, or you want to export a product somewhere, you're doing something someplace overseas, you've got lots of choices, and you shouldn't be biased about, I just have this feeling about this, or I've gone and read these articles about this, and it seems like a great place, right? Well, this is a good way for you to be a little more objective about it. And so if you've done the numbers honestly, and you're making a good transposition of values from the data you're looking at to numbers that you're entering into the decision matrix, then you probably will come up with a pretty good answer that's justifiable. And that's one of the most important things to keep in mind here, is that this is a justifiable decision, right? Chances are you're going to make a decision like this, and it may be in the interest of gaining financing, and there's some financier who has some money in it, or a boss, some manager who has put you in charge of deciding where this is going to go, and you have to make that decision. So this is to not only help you make a decision, but also help you make a sale, right? When you're building a business plan, you need to have some data, and anybody who's going to want to put money in something like this is not going to just do it because you did a Google search. You've got to do more than that. And this enables you to move from the sort of arbitrary web surfing that's going to get you maybe some good information to a place where you have some good solid numbers, and you can defend your business plan, and you can defend the numbers that you have here. So it's pretty much that simple. By the time you're done, you have a choice of one of these countries. And then the final job really is to take these numbers and analyze them. So when you're writing a report on which of these countries might be the best and using this method of analysis, it's probably best to go categorically through them. So you start with P for political. You offer the data here, and then you compare the three and you explain why it is that you think that one of those countries is the best in terms of political risk. And then you go on down with the economic and the social and the technological, category by category, doing the same sort of analysis. That's the best way to organize it, I think. There's one more thing that I want to say about business plans in general, and the decision matrix is something that helps you out with this, right? But you need to think about this. Whenever you're writing a business plan, one of the most important things is making sure that you are including information that is specific to your business and specific to your industry. All of this stuff is probably going to end up in words in some way, in a document, and something where you're going to have to explain in writing, or maybe even through a presentation, why somebody ought to invest in this project. If you're getting in the weeds about a lot of details that don't have anything to do with your industry, like how many people are in the parliament, or what is the composition of their court system, right? Those are things that probably don't have a strong bearing on making that decision. The most important thing you need to be asking yourself is, what is going on inside that country that will either give me an advantage going there or some kind of a disadvantage that I want to avoid? If it's not hitting that central point, you really don't need the data, and you should just eliminate whatever is extra. Because what's going to happen is that decision maker is going to be looking at that executive summary on the top of that report and flipping to the places, looking through it, hitting the bullet points, and if it's overwhelming with a lot of stuff where they're going, okay, why do I need to know this? Then you will not be making a good case for your business. There's not much more I have to say about this. The decision matrix is a great way to organize your information and then to quantify it in a way where you can persuade a decision maker that your idea to take a business and put it someplace else in the world, is actually a really good one. So until next time, I'll see you soon. Best of luck on your business plans.